The date is the 18th of September 2018, and this young Dominus player has had Rocket League for just over a month now, and he's really starting to enjoy it. Despite being overwhelmed by the various controls, skills, and members of the community, he thinks this may be the game for him. He had scored a few cool goals and saved, which he clipped and likes to admire. Because he's so amazed with these plays he's pulled off, he jumps on YouTube and searches best Rocket League goals to see if anyone has scored goals that are as good as his. And this is where our young Dominus Padawan's innocence peaks. He sees a video by someone called Squishy Muffins. Just quietly, he smirks at the name. But what followed wiped that smirk off and sent it to outer space. This player was coming off the ceiling, carrying the ball in the air, doing all kinds of stuff with it on his roof, as well as plenty of ridiculous things our Padawan couldn't even begin to dream of. This left him in a bit of a dilemma. He could either continue to enjoy the game for what it was at Silver 1, messing around and not taking it too seriously, or he could accept the challenge and step up to the plate. He had heard of this thing called a Grand Champ, and despite the sick logo that comes with it, he began to idolise being granted such a title, as they were claimed to be the best in the game. So, a young Padawan has to make the choice that every single Rocket League player has to make at some stage, to treat it as a mere game or as a part of their life. With the mystical Grand Champ floating around in their mind, they chose to fully invest themselves into this piece of art. Such a choice isn't to be taken lightly though, as it will come with trials and tribulations and plenty of emotions ranging from pure elation to depression to confusion and raw and uncapped rage. Not only this, but he knew that this was something he couldn't treat as a hobby. He had to dedicate time, effort, and training to achieving his goal. In spite of all this, he had no idea what was coming. Initially, this decision wasn't too hard on the apprentice. He watched a few videos and pros, got his settings right, and got rid of that god-awful Dominus in preference of the best car in the game, the Octane. There wasn't too much he could do at this stage, except just play the game and gain a good grasp of it, as realistically he needed the foundations before he could move on to the more advanced stuff and start to rank up. It was lucky that he didn't practice ceiling shots and air dribbles and elected for actual match time and experience, because we all know what a stupid mistake that would be, am I right? As I said, this stage was the easiest, and he eased into goal without putting in too much effort, but by merely working on a few things, playing the game with his friends, and just enjoying improving. He was by no means a good player, but he was satisfied with the effort he put in and the results he received, which was motivation enough for him to continue. This was when our now young Octane player hit his first roadblock, the realms of Rocket League toxicity. He'd played Call of Duty, Fortnite, and plenty of other multiplayer games, but the level of competition and subsequent hostility was something he'd never ever seen before. After being what a saved and close one numerous times, he decided that it was time to sort out the most important bindings in the game, the quick chat. He spent time learning the muscle memory for each quick chat so he could spam nice shot and wow on command and to his heart's content, except for that pesky chat disabled message whenever he overdid it. Anyway, having completed this official initiation into the community, he was beginning to find it difficult to get out of gold. He was beginning to outrank some of his friends by quite a bit as they merely played it for fun, so he decided that if he was to enter the land of the wannabe Grand Champs, aka Platinum, he would have to solo queue. This was both a blessing and a curse. I like to think of it like this. Solo queuing increases rage, but with increased rage comes skill, because you are forced to deal with all sorts of teammates and situations. So, despite the high levels of toxicity and forfeit rate, our maturing Padawan eventually had played and trained hard enough that he'd mastered the basics and entered Platinum. A short-term goal of his and something he could look back and be proud of, despite the hardship it took to get there. Now, this is where the harsh solo queuing of gold began to pay off. Because he was forced to develop skills and a mentality above his rank to get into Platinum, he breezed through it. Whilst it took him over a month to get from Gold 3 to Plat 1, he'd reached Diamond within 2 weeks. And despite the common trope of Platinum being a hole for many players filled with toxicity and egos, this wasn't a problem for our Padawan. So I guess you could say he was pretty lucky. But success can only last for so long, and it ended at Diamond. Up until this point, our apprentice had relied on the tough times of Gold and the rank grind to get him this far, and consequently hadn't spent much time in training, analysing replays, or just properly focusing on good rotation. And it was evident. This was probably the most frustrating time of his Rocket League career, as he had just gone through a period of invincibility in Platinum, and Diamond had brought this to an abrupt stop. So, like the pros and content creators recommend to avoid going down the John Sandman path, he actually invested time into learning the advanced mechanics and watched pro gameplay to better his game and positioning sense. It was by no means a swift process, as it took at least 2 months to finally break into champ, but the feeling of when he got it was better than a toxic opponent own goaling in OT. This was the first time he'd really considered himself good at the game. Well, at least he gained some satisfaction from reaching champ, because he then oscillated between Diamond 2 and champ 1 for the next 6 months. You know how I said before that getting to champ was the hardest part of his career? Yeah, well, that isn't even close to this. It got to the point where he didn't feel any anger or frustration, it was just pure hopelessness. He was doing most things right, training, watching, analysing, and just nothing would work. He went through several phases. Firstly, he just grinded because he thought he could eventually overcome it like he had previously. Then he began to see no other option but to blame his teammates as they were dragging him down, which he tried to no avail. So he began training even harder and focusing on fixing every facet of his game and essentially reinventing his playstyle. This last and final plea to improve initially didn't work, but after playing a few games, getting into a rhythm over a few weeks, he broke through and entered Champ 2. It was close. He could feel it. Only 2 more ranks and around 220 MMR separating him from the goal he set out to achieve. This made him hungrier than ever. Champ 2 was pretty much exactly the same as Champ 1, just over a slightly shorter time period. However, because he had done this before, he knew what he had to do. And despite the usual amount of frustration, toxicity and grind, he made it to Champ 3. However, he didn't hold this for long and quickly deranked back to low Champ 2. The difference was this time he knew he had the ability to get there, it was just a matter of when. So he was patient and kept working on his weaknesses, solidifying his mechanics and positioning, and he was back there within a few weeks. This time for good. He was a Champ 3 and he could say it with confidence. Despite staying there, he fluctuated quite a bit, going from Div 1 to Div 3 and back to Div 1 in a single session. However, he did make one run where he came cruelly close after winning around 10 out of 11 games and going from Champ 3 Div 1 to higher Champ 3 Div 4, only a mere 2 games away from Grand Champ. But in classic Rocket League fashion, he choked and deranked back to Division 1. At any other rank he would have found this absolutely infuriating, but with the goal so close, he knew he couldn't let it get to him, and about 2 weeks later, another opportunity presented itself. Similar to the first, he started winning and could not stop, starting at very low Champ 3 Division 1 on one evening and finishing up in Division 4 by the end of the session. Determined as ever, he got on the next day to try to continue his form. He went through the motions, warming up, playing a few games of ones before entering ranked. This time, unlike the last, the winning did not cease. He powered through the large Champ 3 Division 4 bracket to get within 1 game of Grand Champ. Now, you're probably expecting something miraculous or unexpected to happen, like he lost and went on a massive derank session back to Champ 2, or hit a ceiling shot double tap to win in overtime. After all, it would be a fitting conclusion to the story. But no, it was just another normal game which had a close start until he blew them away in the end to secure the win. There was nothing special about it. And that was it. I had just reached Grand Champ for the first time in my life. It was sort of a mix of elation and relief, as I had just achieved my goal I had set out for almost 2 years ago, and was relieved that I didn't have to put myself through the stress of doing it all over again. After all, there's nothing like being in High Champ 3 on the brink of Grand Champ. They were some of the most intense games I've ever played. So that was the story of how a young, innocent Padawan who bought the game for a bit of fun embraced the challenges and tribulations of Rocket League. And honestly, I can say that I learned some pretty valuable things from it, and I don't regret 1 second of it. Now, I've just got to get those GC rewards.